I got advised by dispatch that they needed me for a welfare check for Miss Edna Suttles. I arrive on scene and friends of Miss Edna are standing there. They're worried about her and that Miss Edna didn't show up to work and that Miss Edna's not coming to the door.
There's no signs of any kind of home breaking or disturbance or anything like that. But her vehicle was missing.
The son walked through the house and saw that there were a couple things out of place. Her bed was unmade, which was extremely uncharacteristic of her.
Her shades were up. According to her son, she never would have left her shades up during the night.
He also informed me that she had about $50,000 worth of jewelry that was missing. That's a potential armed robbery on site. At that point, I'm realizing that this is not a welfare check anymore. This is a missing person. Something is not right.
By this time, we had sent out a bolo for the 80-year-old woman, Edna Suttles, and a picture of her vehicle.
After she went missing, she had no phone activity, no social media activity. She just vanished. Her and her vehicle was gone. I was starting to fear the worst.
While on routine patrol, Edna's vehicle was found just outside of a hotel in Travelers Rest. We check with the hotel clerk, and Edna's not a guest. That's definitely odd. Backtracking the surveillance footage, we're able to see Edna's vehicle arrive that morning at the grocery store parking lot. And we see this man, and it was obvious that they knew each other. They waved to each other, and we have no idea who he is. He walks over to his car, gets a small bag, and gets into the front of the Grand Cherokee with Edna, and they drive off. That afternoon, you see Edna's Grand Cherokee back to the grocery store parking lot, almost out of view of the camera. The subject walks all the way back to the front of the parking lot, gets into his car, and brings it right alongside the Grand Cherokee. And it's apparent that he's moving something from the Cherokee to the sedan. He then gets into the Cherokee, drives that to go across the shopping center.
Investigators later observed a white male arriving in Miss Suttles' Jeep and backing it in a spot behind the hotel, and then wipes the vehicle down. The hood, the doors, the windows, the handles, and then he leaves, walks away from the vehicle. A short time later, like within seconds, returns and starts wiping down the hatchback, the inside of the door handles, and everything that was touched. This was a game changer. Miss Suttles is probably in danger.
Normal people don't wipe down a vehicle like that unless they're trying to conceal their identity because they just did something criminal. Then quickly walks back to the car, gets in, and proceeds on 25 North out of Travelers Rest. This has escalated from a standard missing persons case to now a kidnapping and/or homicide. Now we need to figure out who this guy is, where he came from, and where he went. And most importantly, where's Edna?
My mother, she had no fear about anything. She was the first female bail bondsman in the state of South Carolina. She was every bit of 5'0" nothing. She was the spunkiest little lady you'd probably ever meet.
She liked to be seen. She had just rooms of clothes. When she walked in the room, she took the room. And she was just amazing.
She loved helping people when she could. Later on in life, she was taking care of other people with dementia and Alzheimer's. She'd be taking care of people that were younger than her. She was just a good-hearted person. She was full of life.
I was praying that she would be found. Just let me know something. Let us find her. Don't let her be gone. Not like this.
Around 9 or 9:30, the white male had went inside the grocery store and purchased a 4-pack of yogurt where he paid cash for. But when he purchased the yogurt, he scanned his supermarket discount card.
We were able to get the information for that value card back from the grocery store. And that let us know exactly who it was. It was Daniel Prince out of Bostic, North Carolina.
I ran a criminal history track on him and found out he had a pretty scary criminal history, including kidnapping, where he served approximately 13 years in Michigan for kidnapping a young lady in the 90s. Knowing what we know about Prince and not knowing anything about where Miss Suttles is, time was of the essence.
This isn't the type of guy that you ask to voluntarily come down to the station to have a chat with us. So what we decided to do is issue an arrest warrant for grand larceny, for stealing her vehicle, essentially. Our own fugitive warrants team, they coordinated with the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office in North Carolina, and early in the morning they found him outside his home in the silver sedan. And they took him into custody without any issue.
Totally cooperating, just relax. Not doing anything, but not cooperating. Alright, just gonna stand up on your feet. Yeah. Walking him back. That's my wife, she's not gonna do anything. Take care of it. Yeah,
My job is to find the truth about what happened to Edna.
Hey, Greg, pleasure.
At this point, we still don't know whether Edna's alive or dead. Every second counts.
Edna was just a loving, giving person. My mother loved butterflies. And when my mother passed, Edna said, I want you to have this. And said, you'll think of your mother. And it was just the most beautiful blanket. They had butterflies on it. That was just the kind of friend she was. The moment I heard she was missing, I jumped in the car. I looked for her everywhere for days, just hoping this nightmare would end.
You guys have COVID?
No. Do you have COVID?
No.
Okay.
No, not to the best of my knowledge.
Daniel Prince had a criminal history. He's been around the block. He knows the system. But we knew we had to act fast and start asking tough questions.
Okay. Why am I here?
All right. I'll talk to you about August 27th, 2021 of this year. Do you remember where you were at?
Not specifically.
Where do you think you were at?
I've been going all over the place. I've been back and forth to Charlotte. I've been down to South Carolina. I do a lot of home remodeling, home repairs.
Where's your jobs in South Carolina taking you?
Actually, I was down to Traveler's Rest, but I don't know if it was Friday or Thursday. I know I'd been there earlier that week.
Okay. What kind of job were you working on?
I wasn't.
You wasn't?
I wasn't. This lady had talked to me several times. I'd been down to her house 2 or 3 times. We kind of got to be friends.
So it's 3 or 4 times you've been down there?
Yeah, 3 times.
She's never given you work?
No.
Okay, so specifically the 27th.
I think I was down there on the 24th.
So
why are we...
What you're telling us is it's not you on the 27th? Food Line parking lot?
I don't think so.
That's not you?
That's me. What is that?
Food Line, August 27th, 2021, 9:23.
Okay.
32 seconds. Ringing a bell?
Yep. Yeah, I went down to Food Line. Okay.
Here's y'all in the hotel parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah? Oh, look, you're walking around the car.
Yeah.
You wiped the entire car down.
Because I was worried.
You were worried. Here's you getting back into your car and driving away. Look, man. Where's that?
What do you
We need to know. Listen, Dan. Where is it?
I don't have a clue.
Dan? Please, her family is desperately looking for her.
She's missing right now.
Yes, Dan, where is it?
I don't have a clue. I dropped her off at her house.
Dan, please listen. You did not drop her off at her house. You know what?
When I got, okay, I can help you here. Yeah, give me a second. You gotta let me answer the questions when they're asked. She said she wanted me to take her and drive around in my vehicle. So I left her vehicle. I went down to Food Lion and she was in my vehicle with me. And I dropped her off at home.
His story wasn't believable by any means. Why didn't you just go to her house? Why did you drive her car back and then ditch it in the hotel parking lot? It was essentially like pulling teeth.
You're the last one with her. We got you on video.
I'm not denying I was with her.
So,
Okay. You think, this is what I want to see what you're thinking here. You think that someplace from Food Lion to her house, this lady disappeared?
yeah, we know that. I mean, she disappeared between her house.
I dropped her off at her house. I dropped her off at her house because she said her daughter was coming up.
It's not making sense of it. I mean, you're the last person to be in a vehicle you wiped out of a lady that's missing.
That sounds really up.
It does. It does. That's why we're here.
I took her home. I dropped her off and I left. Okay. Well then, all right. Yeah, I don't know this. I got this whole thing.
Let's go back to why you wiped the car down.
The only thing I did was because I knew I'd been in and out of her car all the time with her. I'm like, there is no way in hell I'm going to just leave this thing here. And I wasn't going to have part of me on that vehicle. And that's it. People do strange, weird. I got a real bad past from a long time ago. And unfortunately, my past from a long time ago, a kidnapping, probably makes this look really stupid. But that's not me.
Really?
I didn't.
That's what we're saying, man.
I didn't do anything bad enough. I did not do anything to Edna except drop her off at home.
It was apparent that Prince wasn't going to give up her location. The more you pressed him, the more he pushed back. It's obvious that he knows a lot more about what's going on than what he's willing to tell us. So what we decided to do is to end this conversation. We need to gain more evidence, come back and re-interview him.
What are you actually charging me with?
It's grand larceny.
Grand larceny.
Okay.
That's where we're at right now.
Okay. So I can bond out and go home?
It's a possibility.
Okay.
Possibility.
You're not charging me with anything other than grand larceny?
Not right now. That's where we're at.
You seem very, very relieved this is grand larceny.
Because you're talking to me about a missing person.
And not murder or kidnapping.
Yeah. Okay, if somebody was questioning you, saying that someone's missing and that you're the last person that saw them, wouldn't you be relieved that they didn't think you kidnapped or killed somebody?
Well, I'll let you know if I'm ever in that chair. You done?
Yeah, let's see if we can get our paperwork. We'll see. Yes.
At this point, we're concerned. He could potentially get out on bond, and he can go on the run. He can go destroy evidence if he were to get out. Time is of the utmost urgency. When we got out there, we found a number of weapons, handguns, rifles, shotguns, a couple of them with obliterated serial numbers. He had a small arsenal. That's when we contacted the FBI. This is rapidly becoming a very big case.
He immediately was charged for weapons violations due to his criminal history. He's prohibited from possessing firearms.
Now, we have another card to play, and we're finding things that's probably gonna keep him in jail for a while. While we're going through his belongings, and I discover a credit card to a Nancy Rago and other personal items with her name on it. It seemed that Prince made himself the power of attorney for this lady.
Nancy Rago is not his wife. Now we have this new name, Nancy Rago. And who is she?
We found that she had told people that she was going to go live with Mr. Prince, and they were going to live off the grid and move away together. And we found out that the family had not directly spoken to her in quite some time.
Further investigation revealed Ms. Ragos hadn't been seen since 2017, for 4 years.
We were able to see her Social Security be deposited into her accounts, and the very next day, almost to the dime, that money coming out of the accounts at an ATM near where we knew Prince to reside. This unfortunately looks like it's potentially another victim.
Nancy Ann's first love was the beach. I remember in summertime, she would come and we would go to the lake and go water skiing and go down to Myrtle Beach. My brother-in-law was pulling us behind his boat. Loved the water, even as a child.
Nancy Ann was effervescent. She was the life of the party. Every holiday, after the meal was finished, the men of the family would move the dining room table and create a dance floor. Nancy Ann would cheer for all of us and dance. Her laugh was infectious.
Nancy Ann. Hey, baby.
One of the things that was recovered was a cell phone for Dolores Sellers, who I learned was Nancy Rigo's mother. Dolores Sellers passed away within weeks of Nancy Rigo's disappearance. We began to suspect there was something nefarious with that as well.
Now we have 2 missing people, possibly more. The stakes are even higher. Are they alive? We want to answer that question first and foremost.
Hey, sir, how are you? Good.
We thought that he probably would respond to being interviewed by the FBI.
Hey, I'm next. FBI? That's it. Okay. Special agent, that's initial death guy. You want
In a way that kind of helps bolster his ego a little bit. And anytime you build up a man's ego, you're on the right track to get more information than you probably would otherwise.
Well, thanks. You want some water as we talk?
Are 99% water, 100% or 1% true serum?
I wish we had that, right? Are you okay to talk with us or at least get started and have a conversation with us?
I'm okay to see where this is going.
Okay, that's fair enough. I'm primarily in South Carolina. So what I know there is they're trying to locate a missing lady there. So what I'd love to do is just ask you about that and kind of get the details. And
Why would the FBI be interested in that?
because I found out a little bit about this case and it's piqued my interest. And then I found out about you and it piqued my interest even more. Part of this is helpful just to get ahead in this frame of mind.
Yeah, there's something you guys are fishing for here. I've been 13 and a half years in prison. You learn how to read people very well. And I know that you're fishing for something. I know that. That's why you're here. The whole saying, the interview doesn't start till the first lie happens.
Well,
It was a little bit of a balancing act of trying to get more information without couching the question in a way that would sound accusatory. At the point where he felt like I was pushing or that I was being disrespectful, I do think he would have then probably would have terminated our interview.
how many times did you see her in August? Was it more than one, you think? How many times do you think you were able to actually go visit her? And if you had to, like, estimate, like you said, you went more than one time down there, what would your guess be?
Okay.
In August.
And if you keep doing this, okay, I've given you the answer 3 or 4 times. And this is what I know about your line of work. You're going to keep asking me the same thing over and over and over in hopes that something changes. It's not going to change, man.
No, I can promise you that's not what I'm doing.
I have no problem talking to you. What I have a problem with is when it becomes more of an interrogation than talk. If I'm being interrogated, I need my attorney with me. I have zero thought in my mind that you are anything close to an idiot. Okay, so when I told you 3 or 4 times, I'm 100% certain you remember that.
If I made you feel like you're interrogated, I apologize.
For him, being treated like that was something that was beneath him. It made him feel more like he was a subject rather than maybe a peer that we were working with together. Our goal was to try to have an atmosphere where he felt that we weren't necessarily on opposite sides from him, but that we were kind of shoulder to shoulder as we were walking through this investigation.
So I was just kind of talking about some of the facts of the case, and you helped me figure out, say, okay, Justin, here's why this isn't important or this is important. And I'll lay some of it out to you.
Go ahead.
I think that you had I think you had a bank card for somebody that wasn't.
Nancy Sellers Rigo?
That's it, yeah. Tell me about that.
I am her legal power of attorney.
Okay.
She lives between 2 or 3 different places, and she went on the run to live with her boyfriend Dan. And she basically doesn't want to have anything where somebody could track her through her banking stuff. So I send her gold coins or money that she can get rid of. In fact, I have a letter from her that if anybody ever wants it, will give it to my attorney, for my attorney to give it to people, that lays out in her own handwriting exactly what this arrangement is. But I don't see any reason for anybody to have that at this point in time, because we're not looking for her. She's not missing, literally. There's no big deal there. I'm starting to believe you don't think I'm telling you the truth.
Well, I'm not trying to accuse you of anything.
How do I seem to you? I mean, don't I seem like I want to talk to you?
Yeah, and I'm appreciative of that.
That's not usually how people are, I would imagine, if they're trying to hide something.
I think that he had created such a crazy tale of everything that happened. Now wasn't the time to really challenge all of those facts, because I wanted to have a relationship with him where I could talk to him again.
I get the feeling from you a little bit that there's, not that you're hiding something, but that there's a whole lot to you that I don't get. I do think you've got a pretty interesting story, and I'm not 100% sure what all that is, but if you want that story told by the Bureau, like, I'm probably the guy to do that for you.
I'm not really that worried about this.
Are you okay if I were to not try to talk about the same stuff over and over again, but if I get some new piece of information that you may get help, would you be willing to talk to me again?
Anytime you want to talk to me.
Appreciate that.
Even if I find out that I'm released from here, I will make myself available to you.
Thank you.
It was probably the best thing to just terminate the interview at that point. And as long as he felt like I was being fair, he would talk to me. And so we set out to gather the evidence we needed in order to prove that he was responsible for the death of at least 2 women, and then go speak to Mr. Prince again. There was garages and buildings stacked from floor to ceiling. And they found some jewelry that belonged to Edna on the property of Mr. Prince.
Then a B box was located, set a little bit back away from the house. And when they looked inside the B box, they found Edna's car keys. And also they found the yogurt cup. The yogurt we knew he purchased at the grocery store. Outside the B box, we were able to locate her purse, which had her medication in it, her checkbook in it. Also, Edna's shoes were found there, zip ties, cabling, plastic bags were found there. A tarp, a pickaxe, a shovel was found at that location. I think this is the moment that we knew Edna was not coming home alive.
We were looking through a phone, and we see some family members start to check in on this person. And there was one family member in particular who had kept reaching out. We were worried about you, let us know you're okay. And we made the decision kind of on the spot, let's just call them. I identified myself. I told them that I was working a missing persons case in South Carolina, and that we had a device that we believed belonged to their family member. They said they had not heard or spoken from that person in several years. That person's name was Miss Lee Goodman.
From our understanding of talking to her family, Miss Goodman was absolutely loved and adored by her family. She was energetic. She was an occupational therapist, and she was missed. We also then found, going through her financial records, Daniel Prince was using her finances. We realized this is the same pattern we saw with Miss Rigo.
We realized that Daniel Prince has potentially more victims out there. This guy is an actual serial killer.
Based off my interactions with Mr. Prince, we felt like we had now a good footing to go speak to him again about some of the new evidence that we discovered. Basically present a fact and then ask him to explain it.
I remember you. Yeah. Okay. Why are I here today?
Okay. Well, I'm glad to do it. So we'll talk a little bit. any point you got questions for us, you can feel free to stop us. This is more of a conversation than interrogation or anything else.
It's not a formal crucifixion or something.
Yeah, no, I don't do that.
I like you guys, by the way.
Well,
I mean, you know, you've been courteous to me, and I want to thank you, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to continue to be courteous to you.
okay.
This is a process, and I know we both have to go through it, and we're obviously on other sides of that, but.
Yeah, well, I agree. So you said last time that I was here that if there were some new things that popped up, that you'd be willing to talk to us about it.
Possibly.
Okay, all right. So there was some jewelry that matched some that was missing from Miss Suttles that was found in your house. Just tell me about it.
Not a big deal.
Okay.
She'd asked me to go ahead and sell some stuff for her. From what I gathered, she was very, very pressed for money.
She needs money, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you end up selling any of it for her?
Yes, I did. And I brought her back the money.
You brought her the money. About how much money do you think you sold with the jewelry for her?
I think $1,173, or it was $1,073. Why? What's the deal on this?
Well, all right. I guess I made you a deal a while ago. I have to be straight with you, and I'm gonna keep that agreement. I'm gonna do it.
Okay.
But how about this? Just let me talk for a couple minutes. You just think through as we're talking,
Sure.
and then whatever decision you think is the best way to make, we'll go with that. So there were other things found at your house, and so just hear me out.
You see his head going forward because he wants to try to figure out how to spend this. And I want him to finish listening to everything I had to say before he feels the need to speak. That gives them a little bit of a mental break where they don't feel like they have to come up with a lie or an untruth to me.
There were some other things found at your house. There was several other things of Edna's belongings that were found at your house. There was quite a lot of stuff found in your bee house. It's on the back part of your property.
Okay.
And so there could be a million explanations for some of that stuff, and I don't want to jump to conclusions. And if there's something that happened that you didn't intend to happen, let's talk about it. And so if you'll just be honest with me.
You asked me, I'm trying to remember your wording here, if I would like the Bureau to tell my story,
Right.
To let you know.
Yeah.
There are things that have to happen, and there are things that are going to happen. And I'm a realist, and I have acceptance with this. I would like a little bit of control in how they happen. And I believe I have a shot, ever so slight. If you tell them to turn that off, I will talk to you a little more freely.
Agent Newsom knew that if he didn't turn that camera off, that was probably going to be the end of the conversation. Daniel Prince was ready. He was vulnerable. We needed to capitalize on it.
In addition, that the video recording was turned on. So I talked with Greg and made that.
Now, before we go any further, this might sound really strange to you. Can we pray?
Sure.
Heavenly Father, in the name of you know I have sinned mightily, like King David sinned mightily. Lord, I want to purge myself of all my sins. I wish to use these men as the conduit to do that. And out of respect for that, I am not going to lie to them. And I'm not going to lie before you. And I praise you and I thank you for your glory and your help in this, Lord. In the name of Amen.
Amen. It's an appropriate, powerful prayer.
We're brothers in the Lord. I'm just asking you to help me fix the crap I got myself into.
Yeah, that's my goal. I was praying that God would prepare your heart for this.
If they kill me, I want you there when you do it to pray for me. You two are the only detectives I want to do. So this is your lead. And this is what I want our goal to be, guys. Okay, I mean, I'm not trying to make demands on you. You are the authority here. This is my goal. Dan gets life in a federal prison. I don't even care about numbers. L-I-F-E, federal prison. And that needs to be in writing. Will you gentlemen work with me to obtain those goals?
You've kind of said your part. I'll say mine. I could set these things in motion. I cannot speak for the state, but in order for me to have the most power, I need an inkling of what I need.
Hypothetically. Fair enough.
He was leaning forward, very close to me, looking at me almost with a more pleading look. So I was completely comfortable with him talking, in quote unquote hypotheticals, because how that would sound to a jury would still be very damning.
Okay. Let's put it this way. A person I was very good friends with wanted to do something to put someone basically out of their misery that was very closely related to them. That's one body. That person started having an extreme amount of guilt over this and decided they were going to go tell what had happened. That's the second body.
He's clicking off in his hands about different bodies. The second body that he's talking about is Miss Nancy Arrigo. We believe the first person he's talking about there is Miss Dolores Sellers, Nancy Arrigo's mother.
There's a third body that I did not kill, that a person I was trying to help out, and I knew that they'd be getting Social Security disability for the rest of their life. So I got rid of said bodies, for example, so that I could continue to use the card.
That individual there he's describing is Miss Goodman. We were able to confirm he was collecting her Social Security payments. Now, we wanted to get a statement from him about Miss Suttles.
By any chance, while he's getting all this squared away, can you just help me get that closure for it and his family?
Not until I have this. I clam up like a clam if this doesn't go federal for everything.
Well, do you at least know a good location?
I could give you within 3 feet.
I knew he felt like things were kind of moving fast, and he needed some control of how that happened. He wanted life in a federal prison, and then once I agree to that and I fulfill my end, he'll then help us with the investigation and take us to the body of Miss Suttles. He kind of dangles that over our heads, took it as kind of reasserting some dominance, hopefully reasserting control, which is what he wanted throughout this case. All right, well, I've got my work cut up. I'm going to get started.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It'd be lovely if friendships formed out of this.
Stranger things have happened.
Yes, it has.
I went and checked him out of jail, drove him in my car, took him in the woods. He walked me to a spot and pointed to it and said, "She's right there."
It really wasn't too far from his house, and she was buried a couple of feet down.
The body of Miss Rigo and Miss Goodman were not able to be recovered. An autopsy was conducted. We do believe strongly that Mr. Prince used a cocktail of medications to incapacitate Miss Suttles.
Absolutely incredible that we were able to bring her home. And the monster who did this to not just Edna, but the other women and their families, he was gonna face the justice that he deserves.
There is something to be said about the closure, but at the same time, it takes away any hope you may have. You know your mother's never coming back. I can't even put it into words the way it makes you feel.
Daniel Prince of Bostic pleaded guilty in federal court in Spartanburg in the kidnapping and death of Edna Suttles.
Authorities called Daniel Prince a monster and serial killer. They say he's also responsible for the disappearance or death of at least 3 other women.
In exchange for a life sentence, he took the responsibility for the deaths of Edna Suttles, Nancy Rago, Dolores Sellers, and Leah Goodman. The guy is a monster and a master manipulator.
He's a very controlling person. He always felt the need to kind of keep me in my place, but you just have to check your ego because it was important for the victims. It was important for the case. I feel like I did everything I could for those families. I don't know that anything will make them feel better.
Nancy Ann.
Aunt Dolores was our matriarch. We all looked to Aunt Dolores. Nancy Ann loved life. She was so effervescent. And Aunt Dolores the same way. So I hope with all that I am that we can carry on their legacy.
My life has a big hole in it now. I can see Edna in everything I do. And she's missed every day. I know my life is not as blessed as it was, but I am blessed to have known her.
The morning dawned in Modesto with a quiet that seemed almost unnatural. The kind of calm that stretched over a neighborhood like a delicate veil, hiding secrets beneath its gentle warmth. The winter air held a crisp edge, biting at bare skin yet carrying the scent of dew-soaked lawns and freshly raked leaves. Sunlight pooled lazily across manicured lawns and the quiet streets, but behind closed doors, life was stirring in ways that no passerby could imagine. In one modest, well-kept house on the edge of town, a young woman moved through her morning routine, her every gesture imbued with anticipation and care. Lacey Peterson, with her soft brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, hummed softly to herself as she prepared breakfast. She was glowing, the kind of glow that only comes from hope and expectation. She was 8 months pregnant, and every little motion of her body seemed to reflect a life brimming with love and possibilities. Her eyes, wide and warm, scanned the kitchen as she set out the plates, her thoughts lingering on the tiny life that grew within her. The baby, a boy they had decided to name Connor, was due to arrive any day, and the air around her seemed to vibrate with quiet, domestic happiness. She moved with the gentle precision of someone who has mastered the art of caring for others, her hands never pausing as she laid out breakfast, filled the dog's water bowl, and straightened a picture frame on the wall. The walls of the house echoed faintly with the low hum of morning, the sound of a kettle heating, the faint ticking of a clock, the soft padding of a dog's paws across the floor. Every detail was ordinary, every gesture mundane, yet layered with the subtle beauty of a life unfolding normally, predictably, lovingly. Outside, the neighborhood was waking too. Mail carriers jingled down the street, their footsteps punctuating the quiet, and a few early risers jogged past with dogs, their breath misting in the cold morning air. The sun climbed higher, scattering gold across the roofs, painting the neighborhood with light that suggested security and continuity. Within the walls of her home, Lacey felt safe, surrounded by the life she and her husband had carefully constructed. She felt content, even blissful, wrapped in the ordinary magic of preparation, of plans, of expectation. She had no inkling, none at all, that this particular morning was about to fracture every assumption she had ever held about safety, love, and the man she trusted most in the world. In another part of the house, Scott Peterson moved through the morning with the same appearance of routine, but with a subtle tension lurking beneath the surface. On the exterior, he looked composed, neat in his jeans and a collared shirt, hair combed back, eyes alert yet measured. To any casual observer, he was the image of stability and calm. Yet there was a layer of calculation in his movements, an almost imperceptible tightness in his jaw, a light flicker of restlessness in his eyes. Where Lacey's actions carried the warmth of care and expectation, Scott's carried the weight of something else entirely, an undercurrent of a life double-layered, a secret threaded into every gesture, every thought. He kissed Lacey on the cheek with a practiced tenderness, exchanged words of daily trivialities, and then stepped outside into the brisk morning air. The dog followed him briefly, tail wagging, before returning to the warmth of the kitchen where Lacey hummed and moved. Scott's figure receded down the driveway, heading toward a plan he had rehearsed silently, meticulously, in his mind over the weeks and months leading up to this morning. It was Christmas Eve, a day that should have been filled with joy and anticipation, yet beneath the surface, the harmony of this household was about to be shattered. Lacey had plans to walk the dog, to perhaps make a final check of the nursery, to organize last-minute details for the arrival of their child. Her heart brimmed with excitement, a subtle, unspoken hope that this family, small and fragile, would continue to grow in safety and love. She had no inkling that this morning would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch over months, gripping the nation in disbelief and fear. Outside, Scott's journey toward the bay was a performance of normalcy, a drive he would later claim was innocuous, a fishing trip to pass time on a holiday morning. But within that drive, within the polished facade of routine, there was something hidden, something premeditated and chilling, known only to him. Every turn of the wheel, every glance in the rearview mirror, carried a weight that no observer could detect yet that would, in retrospect, reveal the shadowed truth lurking beneath the mundane. Hours passed. The warmth of the kitchen, the soft light filtering through the curtains, and the gentle hum of a normal day continued, yet the ordinary had begun to fracture. Lacey's absence, at first unnoticed in the flow of domestic preparation, would soon become the epicenter of a growing storm. Her dog, loyal and instinct-driven, wandered the halls and the yard, leash dragging behind it, searching for a companion who was no longer there. The subtle signs of disruption, objects slightly out of place, the absence of familiar sounds, the quiet that no longer carried the rhythm of two lives intertwined, began to accumulate, each unnoticed at first, then becoming impossible to ignore. The neighborhood, which had seemed secure in its blanket of early morning light, began to feel the subtle tremor of unease, though no one could yet articulate the source. By the afternoon, concern had begun to stir. Neighbors noted the unusual quiet, the stillness that hung over the Peterson home. The dog continued its restless pacing, its soft whines weaving into the tension of the air. Friends and family began to call, their voices laced with curiosity and a growing thread of worry. Every unanswered question, every delay in communication, added to the silent crescendo of tension building around a house that, moments before, had seemed perfectly ordinary. Scott returned home later, carrying the practiced composure of a man who believed appearances could hold the truth at bay. He announced simply that Lacey was gone, vanished from the home without explanation. His eyes, carefully controlled, reflected a depthless calm, a mask that would later become one of the most chilling aspects of the case. No panic, no frayed edge of despair, just the measured delivery of a fact that would ignite national fascination and horror. The house itself seemed to absorb the tension, every corner, every object, becoming a witness to the absence. The nursery, with its small crib and carefully arranged clothes, stood silent, filled with expectation, and now with a quiet terror. Breakfast dishes remained on the table, the lingering scent of morning coffee and toast mingling with the sterile air of a home suddenly emptied of its most precious occupant. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent, casting long shadows across the lawn, stretching the ordinary into the realm of the uncanny. By evening, the disappearance was no longer a private concern, it became a matter of public fascination. Local authorities were called in, and the quiet suburban street became an unlikely stage for a drama that would grip the nation. Every neighbor, every passerby, became an inadvertent witness. Every glance and observation filtered into the growing narrative of tension and dread. Scott Peterson, the husband, maintained a composed exterior, speaking to authorities and the media with the calm precision of a man rehearsed in the art of deception. The layers of ordinary life, of neighborhood security and domestic normalcy, had begun to peel away, revealing the stark and terrifying possibility that danger had not come from the outside, but from within. And so, as night fell over Modesto, as the air turned colder and the shadows deepened, a quiet terror settled over the Peterson home. The ordinary had been pierced by the extraordinary, the expected by the unimaginable. Lacey Peterson, carrying the promise of new life, was gone, leaving behind a husband who moved with composure, a neighborhood steeped in confusion, and a nation poised on the brink of horror and fascination. In that stillness, in that fragile twilight, the first notes of a story that would haunt headlines, courtrooms, and living rooms across the country began to play. It was a story of love and betrayal, of appearance and reality, of the profound danger that can exist where trust is absolute and vigilance absent. No one could have predicted how this day, bright and ordinary, would unfold into one of the most chilling true crime narratives of the early 21st century. And yet, as the stars blinked into existence above Modesto, the stage was set for a journey into darkness, one that would reveal not only the fragility of life, but the frightening capacity for deceit that can dwell behind the calmest of facades. The town of Modesto stretched out under the muted California winter sky like a painting. Rows of tidy homes, streets lined with bare-branched trees, and the soft hum of daily life threading through the air. It was the kind of town that promised stability and predictability, where neighbors knew each other by name, where high school football games were community events, and where the rhythms of life had a comforting regularity. The streets were quiet that morning, the occasional car stirring up leaves in lazy swirls, and the scent of damp earth and faint exhaust lingering in the crisp air. Yet beneath that calm, the undercurrents of human complexity and concealed desperation moved invisibly, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The Peterson house sat comfortably on a modest lot, its exterior unassuming but cared for, reflecting a family that had worked hard to cultivate an image of normalcy. The white siding gleamed faintly in the soft morning light, and a small wooden porch framed the front door, adorned with a simple wreath that Lacey had placed just the week before. Windows were clean, curtains neatly tied back, offering a glimpse into a home that radiated order and stability. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, a carefully curated world of domestic care. The walls were painted in soft, neutral tones, punctuated by photographs capturing smiling faces, moments frozen in time, weddings, holidays, casual Sunday afternoons. Every room had a purpose, every object its place, from the nursery with its tiny crib and soft blankets to the kitchen counters lined with appliances polished to a gleam. It was in this ordinary, serene setting that the extraordinary began to unfold, the kind of narrative that would later grip not only the local community, but the entire nation. The juxtaposition of domestic tranquility with the hidden turmoil beneath was stark, almost surreal. Lacey, in her last days before disappearance, had spent mornings organizing the nursery, folding tiny clothes, arranging toys with a meticulous hand, her mind filled with visions of bedtime stories, lullabies, and the soft weight of a baby in her arms. Scott, meanwhile, moved through the same house with a very different set of priorities, a private agenda that would remain hidden from everyone else, invisible under the layers of polite smiles and casual conversation. The town itself seemed almost complicit in the illusion of normalcy. Children walked to school with backpacks slung over their shoulders, waving to familiar faces along the way. Small cafes and corner stores opened for business, owners exchanging pleasantries and nods. Dogs barked in fenced yards, adding rhythm to the quiet. Even the weather seemed gentle that day, a soft sun filtering through thin clouds, a calm breeze whispering through the bare branches, carrying a hint of something like serenity. From the outside, everything suggested life as it always had been, steady and predictable. Yet for those paying close attention, subtle signs hinted at the cracks beneath the surface. Lacey's friends noted the occasional tension in her voice during phone calls with Scott. Neighbors had seen Scott pacing in the yard late at night, a cigarette burning at his fingertips, staring off into the distance with a focus that seemed more internal than on the world around him. The dog, loyal and sensitive, sometimes whimpered at his presence, a quiet intuition that something was not quite right. Small details, almost imperceptible, yet threaded through the everyday like invisible warning signals. For the casual observer, these were trivial, easily dismissed. But in hindsight, they would form a pattern, a series of breadcrumbs that hinted at the coming disaster. The community's perception of the Petersons as a model family played a significant role in how the events unfolded. Scott, tall and lean, with a boyish charm and a seemingly affable personality, had cultivated an image of dependability. He worked steadily, kept a neat appearance, and engaged in small-town social circles without drawing undue attention to himself. Lacey, warm, gentle, and deeply committed to her family and community, fit seamlessly into this image. Their marriage, outwardly perfect, was admired by friends and neighbors alike, who saw them as an embodiment of domestic success, loving, committed, and on the brink of a new chapter with the arrival of their first child. This reputation, however, was a double-edged sword. It shielded Scott from suspicion, giving him a cover that made it harder for anyone to imagine the darkness that lay beneath his carefully crafted exterior. The town itself was small enough that news traveled quickly, yet large enough that each household maintained its own semblance of privacy. It was a place where a sudden absence or unusual behavior could be noticed immediately, and yet the cultural trust that bound neighbors together, assumptions of decency, faith in the social contracts of marriage and family, often allowed troubling signals to pass unexamined. The streetlights flickered on as dusk approached, casting long shadows across manicured lawns, a visual metaphor for the duality of appearances and hidden realities. Families settled in for the evening, unaware that within one particular house, the balance between light and darkness, trust and deceit, had already begun to shift dramatically. Inside the Peterson house, the nursery had become a silent witness to the tension and hidden motives swirling around it. The small crib, pristine and ready for an infant, was surrounded by soft pastel blankets, toys carefully placed in neat arrangements, and shelves lined with carefully selected books. Each item was a testament to Lacey's anticipation and preparation, a reflection of the love she intended to give to her child. Yet, within these walls, another narrative was quietly unfolding, one not of hope, but of planning, deception, and an imminent act that would shatter the very foundation of this domestic idol. The interplay of light and shadow in the home mirrored the duality of the people within it. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the delicate fabrics and warm tones of the furniture, while corners remained in semi-darkness, hiding the movements of Scott as he prepared for the day ahead. Every glance, every step, carried the weight of intentions not yet revealed, and the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the hum of appliances, the soft rustling of clothing, became almost sinister in retrospect. They were the soundtrack to a story that was about to diverge sharply from normalcy into the realm of horror. Community life pressed on, oblivious to the imminent disruption. Local schools continued classes, grocery stores hummed with commerce, and routine traffic flowed through Modesto's streets. Yet, the Peterson household, with its perfect exterior, had become the epicenter of a storm that would soon engulf not just the family, but the entire town, and eventually, the nation. Every action taken within its walls, every interaction, every conversation, every choice, was now charged with consequence, teetering on the knife edge between normalcy and catastrophe. The ordinary rhythms of life, from the laughter of children to the mundane chatter of neighbors, created a haunting contrast to the hidden realities behind closed doors. Even the small details of the town's infrastructure seemed to play into the narrative. The creak of the sidewalk boards under a passerby's shoes, the flicker of streetlights casting uncertain shadows on parked cars, the occasional howl of a dog at night, all became part of the unseen tension, elements that would later punctuate memories, statements, and testimony as the investigation unfolded. The environment itself, quiet and seemingly benign, was a stage perfectly suited for the dramatic clash of innocence and malevolence that was about to occur. Within this setting, the stage was meticulously prepared for a convergence of ordinary life and extraordinary crime. The contrast between the warm domesticity of the Peterson home and the calculated duplicity of the husband created a tension that would grip observers and investigators alike. Every element of the setting, the weather, the community, the physical space of the home, the behaviors of those involved, worked together to create a narrative that was as compelling as it was tragic. The town's tranquility, so easily assumed to be a guarantee of safety, became a haunting backdrop against which the story of Laci Peterson's disappearance would unfold. The house that once radiated warmth now held secrets that would ripple outward, unsettling the community and leaving indelible marks on the collective consciousness. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, the calm of the town remained, but within the Peterson home, the ordinary had begun to dissolve into something more complex and dangerous. The quiet streets, the familiar houses, the predictable rhythms, all of it became a frame, a canvas against which the human drama of deception, obsession, and hidden intent would play out. Every object, every gesture, every sound contributed to a growing sense of unease, a sense that beneath the serene exterior of Modesto, forces were at work that would soon disrupt lives in ways that could never be undone. In this town, on this ordinary winter morning, the elements of a perfect crime narrative were assembling with the precision of clockwork. A seemingly idyllic family, a community lulled into complacency, a home filled with warmth and preparation, and hidden behind polished charm and polite smiles, the cold calculation of a man whose intentions were shrouded in secrecy. This was the setting, both physical and psychological, for a story that would shock a nation, confound investigators, and haunt the imagination of anyone who would later study the details of that fateful Christmas Eve. The stage was set. The light and shadows, the streets and homes, the expectations of a family and the hidden duplicity of its head, all were in place, ready for the events that would follow, events that would transform a quiet California town into the backdrop of one of the most chilling true crime narratives of the early 2000s. The early morning sun filtered softly through the curtains of the Peterson home, casting a golden glow across the nursery where Laci Peterson moved with careful precision. The soft pastels of the room, the pale blues, gentle creams, and delicate yellows, reflected a serenity she carried in her demeanor, a quiet resilience that had always defined her. The nursery was immaculate, each tiny garment folded with intent, each stuffed animal positioned as though ready to watch over a sleeping child. Laci's hands lingered on the crib for a moment, her fingers brushing over the smooth wood, tracing the contours as if committing the space to memory. She paused, closing her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the swell of anticipation fill her chest. The child growing inside her, Connor, was no longer a distant dream, but a living presence, and she could feel his movements beneath her palm, subtle yet insistent, a reminder of the life that would soon join theirs. Her days were a mixture of ordinary tasks and extraordinary attention to detail. Morning routines had taken on a slower, more reflective rhythm as her pregnancy progressed. She prepared meals carefully, balancing nutrition with comfort, speaking softly to her dog as she moved through the kitchen. The aroma of brewing coffee mingled with the scent of fresh toast and vanilla from the candles she often lit to create a sense of calm in the household. Laci hummed faintly as she worked, a tune passed down from her own childhood, a thread that connected her to her past even as she prepared for a future she imagined with hope. Her life was structured around care for her unborn child, care for her husband, care for the home that would soon cradle the beginning of a new generation. Each decision, each movement, reflected a consciousness attuned to nurture, to security, to love. Beyond the physical preparation, Laci was deeply engaged with the emotional and relational world around her. She maintained close ties with her friends, often spending evenings discussing the nuances of pregnancy, anticipating the joys and challenges that awaited. She shared her hopes openly, laughed easily, and exhibited a warmth that made people feel seen and valued. Conversations with family were punctuated with stories of her childhood, her mother's advice, and her dreams for Connor. She spoke of the future with clarity and optimism, of family traditions she hoped to pass on, of small, everyday rituals that would create a sense of belonging and continuity for her child. Her vision of the world was one grounded in care, stability, and love, and she acted consistently to bring that vision into being. Lacey's relationship with Scott had, on the surface, been a continuation of this idealized domesticity. She had married a man who presented himself as attentive, reliable, and charming. Their shared dreams of homeownership, family, and community integration reinforced her sense of security. She imagined a life where daily rhythms, walks through the neighborhood, Sunday morning pancakes, bedtime stories, family vacations, created a tapestry of safety and comfort. Yet, within this picture of normalcy, cracks were beginning to form, subtle enough that only the most perceptive observer might notice them. Scott's occasional absences, his curt phone calls, and moments of inexplicable tension were brushed aside by Lacey as transient worries, as minor deviations in an otherwise secure life. Her trust in him, absolute and unreserved, prevented her from perceiving the deeper currents of deceit that would soon culminate in catastrophe. Her personality was defined not only by her warmth, but by a meticulous attentiveness to detail. Each task in the home was executed with a thoughtfulness that went beyond mere routine. When folding tiny honnesses, she smoothed out every crease as if the precision mattered not only to the presentation, but to the well-being of her child. When placing toys on a shelf, she did so with an understanding of spatial relationships, ensuring that each object was accessible, safe, and inviting. Her movements, though gentle, were deliberate, carrying an undercurrent of foresight, of anticipation, of preparation for the life she imagined in full bloom. Even the smallest choices, where to position the changing table, how to arrange diapers, which blankets to use, were made with an awareness of comfort, safety, and love. These actions, seemingly mundane, were in fact expressions of a mind and heart attuned to the creation of security and care. In social settings, Lacey's warmth extended beyond her immediate family. She was attentive to friends, colleagues, and neighbors, often remembering birthdays, small personal details, and preferences with remarkable accuracy. Her empathy allowed her to connect deeply with others, offering support without judgment, guidance without condescension. In a world that often felt transactional and hurried, her attention to the human element made her presence comforting, stabilizing, and inspiring. People were drawn to her not only for her beauty and calm demeanor, but for the sense of care and validation she offered freely. She had the rare ability to make each person feel significant, seen, and understood, and in her presence, the ordinary routines of life took on a subtle, radiant warmth. Her days were not without anxiety or concern, yet these were tempered by her resilience and practical problem-solving. As her due date approached, she meticulously planned for contingencies, preparing the home for the baby, organizing hospital visits, and maintaining clear lines of communication with family and close friends. She researched prenatal care, dietary needs, and infant safety with a diligence that bordered on meticulousness. Each decision was informed by a desire to ensure not only her own well-being, but the optimal care for Connor, demonstrating a foresight and dedication that characterized her entire approach to life. Her conscientious nature extended into the minutiae of daily living, from scheduling appointments to monitoring her own physical health, reflecting a mindset that valued both preparation and protection. Amid these routines, there was also a layer of personal reflection and anticipation. Lacey often found moments to sit quietly, her hands resting on her abdomen, listening to the subtle movements of Connor within her womb. In these moments, she spoke softly, recounting stories of her childhood, her dreams for him, the values she hoped to instill. She imagined the laughter that would fill the house, the questions he would ask, the milestones he would achieve. These imaginings were both tender and urgent, a meditation on the fragility and beauty of life, and an affirmation of her commitment to care, nurture, and protection. She envisioned a world in which love and stability formed the core of a child's development, and she acted in accordance with that vision every single day. Lacey's attentiveness to emotional detail was mirrored in her interactions with Scott. She sought to create a partnership grounded in mutual support, anticipating needs and offering guidance with patience and clarity. Conversations between them often revolved around practical concerns, finances, home maintenance, preparations for the baby, but beneath these logistical discussions was an unspoken current of affection and expectation. Lacey invested herself emotionally, believing in the partnership she had formed, trusting implicitly that Scott shared her commitment to family and future. Yet, unbeknownst to her, this trust would soon be exploited, and the foundation upon which she had built her sense of safety would be violently undermined. Despite the ordinary appearance of her life, there were subtle markers of her awareness of potential challenges. She maintained connections with her family, checking in regularly, discussing contingencies, and ensuring that lines of communication remained open. These actions were not born of paranoia but of conscientiousness, reflecting a practical mind aware of the complexities of life. Yet, her attention to preparation could not shield her from the betrayal that was unfolding behind the carefully maintained facade of domestic stability. Her sensitivity, empathy, and trust, all traits that made her beloved by those around her, also made her vulnerable to deception and manipulation. In her final days, Lacey continued to move through her routines with grace and purpose. She bathed, dressed, and nourished herself, attending to her health and comfort with careful diligence. She organized the home, placing objects with intentionality, each small act a manifestation of care and foresight. She interacted with friends and family, offering warmth and listening with empathy. She carried within her the quiet strength of someone who understood the value of love, preparation, and attentiveness. Every small gesture, the folding of clothes, the arranging of toys, the gentle patting of a dog's head, was a testament to a life grounded in care, intention, and the anticipation of joy. And yet, in the quiet spaces of her home, beneath the calm and order, there were shadows she could not perceive. The man who shared her life, the one whose face she kissed that very morning, carried intentions hidden from view. In the very house that Lacey had prepared with love, a plan of concealment and betrayal was taking shape, a narrative that would intersect violently with the life she had so carefully constructed. Her routines, her attention to detail, her emotional openness, all of it would collide with forces beyond her comprehension, setting the stage for a story of disappearance, loss, and national fascination. Lacey Peterson, in the fullness of her expectation, hope, and quiet strength, was unaware that her life was about to be violently interrupted. Every moment of domestic care, every interaction filled with warmth, and every anticipatory gesture for her child was on the cusp of being disrupted by actions taken in secret by the man she trusted most. Her story, in its ordinariness, its beauty, and its attention to detail, would become a lens through which the world would later examine betrayal, deception, and the fragile intersection of trust and danger. The stage was set not just in the town, not just in the house, but within the very fabric of Lacey's life, a life that radiated care, warmth, and hope, now poised to confront an unimaginable rupture. The morning of December 24, 2002, began like so many others, with the faint light of dawn filtering through the modest curtains of the Peterson home. Yet, there was an undercurrent in the air that, in hindsight, seemed almost imperceptibly ominous. The dog padded softly across the hardwood floor, its nails clicking gently, ears pricked to every sound. Lacey, as usual, moved with care through her morning routines, adjusting blankets in the nursery, folding tiny clothes, and murmuring softly to her unborn son. The house, filled with domestic order and quiet anticipation, held within its walls the last vestiges of ordinary life, of a life that had been meticulously built, and which would soon be disrupted in a way no one could have anticipated. Scott Peterson, outwardly calm and composed, stepped out into the crisp winter morning with a smile that seemed ordinary to anyone watching from a distance. He told Lacey he was going fishing, a casual, innocuous plan for Christmas Eve. The words left his mouth with a nonchalance that belied the undercurrents swirling beneath, yet Lacey, trusting and unassuming, accepted them without suspicion. The routine, the predictability of her husband's actions, had lulled her into a sense of security that would prove tragically deceptive. The dog, tethered to the leash in the yard, tugged gently, sensing the separation, a quiet, instinctive unease that no human presence could yet interpret. As Scott drove away, the neighborhood remained quiet, the streets lined with dormant trees and neatly trimmed lawns, the occasional car gliding past on the icy asphalt. The world seemed normal, yet within the walls of the home, Lacey's routine continued, unaware of the impending rupture. She had planned a brief walk with the dog, a simple ritual that she had performed countless times, a ritual of both exercise and meditation, a way to clear her mind before settling into the day's preparations for the coming holiday. The leash in her hand was a physical tether to normalcy, an anchor to the rhythm of life that had defined her days. The walk itself was ordinary, punctuated only by the soft crunch of boots on frost-kissed sidewalks, the distant hum of a car engine, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Lacey's thoughts were focused on her unborn child, on the preparations she still needed to make, on the warmth she envisioned for the holidays. Each step, each measured breath, carried the unspoken expectation of return, of completing a day like so many others, unaware that it would become the day that fractured the perception of safety she had always held. As she walked, she may have noticed the subtle shifts in the environment, the long shadows cast by the rising sun, the sudden chill in the wind, but these were the ordinary variances of a winter morning, easily dismissed by someone attuned to the rhythms of life. The dog tugged gently, urging forward, a silent companion in her meditative stroll. In these moments, there was a serenity, a calmness that belied the unseen danger approaching, a calmness that would become haunting in retrospect. The ordinary world, with its muted sounds and gentle light, was about to be interrupted by a presence that no one could yet perceive. Scott Peterson's absence, ostensibly explained by his fishing trip, created a void in the household that was imperceptible at first. He had left instructions, casual remarks about errands or tasks, all designed to reinforce the illusion of normalcy. To any neighbor or passerby, the house appeared as it always had, quiet, orderly, and full of the familiar rhythms of domestic life. Yet within that silence, a moment of disappearance was unfolding, invisible yet monumental, a rupture that would resonate far beyond the walls of the home. As the morning transitioned into midday, the patterns of routine that had defined the household began to falter. Lacey never returned from her walk. The leash remained on the ground, the dog wandering, puzzled and anxious, an instinctive signal that something had gone wrong. Inside the house, the small nursery awaited its occupant, a silent witness to the absence. Tiny clothes remained folded on shelves, the crib stood empty, and the warmth that had filled the home now felt hollow, shadowed by uncertainty. Friends and family, initially assuming a delayed return, began to notice the unusual silence, a quiet that suggested the ordinary had been pierced by an extraordinary absence. When Scott returned, he presented the picture of a concerned husband. His tone was calm but deliberate, measured to suggest worry without panic. He announced that Lacey was missing, that she had not returned from her walk, and that there was no indication of where she might be. To the casual observer, his composure seemed reassuring, almost comforting, a man maintaining rationality in the face of uncertainty. But to those later analyzing the sequence of events, every gesture, every word, and every pause would reveal a tension, a dissonance, a subtle misalignment between the expected behavior of a man losing his wife and the actions he displayed. The initial investigation, by local authorities revealed no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked, the windows secure, and the house showed no evidence of struggle. There were no torn garments, no displaced furniture, no markings that suggested a violent confrontation. The absence of these signs created a chilling hypothesis. The person last in the house, the person Lacey had trusted most, could not be ruled out as a suspect. The dog's leash on the ground, the wandering movements of the animal, and the precise order of the house became silent clues, fragments of evidence that hinted at a story far more complex and dark than a simple disappearance. Neighbors began to call, to knock on doors, to inquire about Lacey's whereabouts. Their voices carried concern, their gestures sincere, yet they were met with the calm assurances of Scott. He explained her absence, suggested possibilities, and projected the image of a husband bewildered and searching. Yet subtle inconsistencies, the absence of visible worry, the timing of calls he made to others, the way he discussed her disappearance, would later become critical elements of the case, examined and re-examined in forensic detail, dissected by investigators and the public alike. By evening, a search had begun. Authorities, friends, and neighbors combed the neighborhood, calling her name, checking streets, alleys, and parks. The air was filled with the faint tension of uncertainty, a mixture of hope and fear that pressed against every heart. Lights from flashlights bounced across fences and trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long in the dim winter dusk. Every sound was amplified, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a gate. The ordinary was fractured, replaced by an anxious vigilance, a sense that something extraordinary, and potentially catastrophic, had occurred. Media presence began to form, their cameras capturing the concern and urgency of the community. News vans arrived, their lights reflecting off the polished cars parked on the street, the hum of generators blending with the murmured speculation of onlookers. Interviews were conducted, statements taken, and the first seeds of national attention were sown. Every detail was recorded, every movement noted, as the disappearance of Lacey Peterson transitioned from a personal crisis to a public spectacle, the story amplified by the contrast between her ordinary life and the extraordinary nature of her sudden absence. Within the household, the silence was deafening. The nursery, the kitchen, the living room, all spaces that had hummed with anticipation, laughter, and domestic warmth, were now voids, empty and echoing with uncertainty. The objects that had defined her life, from neatly folded baby clothes to arranged toys, stood as silent markers of the day's rupture. Each was a witness to her absence, each a reminder of the life that had been interrupted in a way no one could yet comprehend. The ordinary rhythms of the home, once comforting, became ghostly, a stark backdrop for the unfolding nightmare. As night descended fully, the search expanded, encompassing the surrounding areas, waterways, and parks. Law enforcement coordinated teams, canvassing neighborhoods, checking surveillance, and recording every detail. Volunteers joined, motivated by concern, fear, and a collective sense of responsibility. Every lead, no matter how trivial, was pursued with diligence. The air, once crisp and normal, now carried the tension of unknown variables, the anxiety of human hope and fear mingled in equal measure. Through it all, Scott maintained his carefully measured demeanor, guiding the search, speaking to media, and projecting calm. Friends and family noted his composure, some reassured, others puzzled by its steadiness. In retrospect, every word, every gesture, every expression would be scrutinized, dissected for evidence of intention, deceit, and premeditation. The ordinary had been shattered, replaced by an extraordinary narrative that would unfold in the coming weeks, months, and years, a narrative that would capture national attention and become one of the most haunting cases of the early 21st century. By the end of that day, Lacey Peterson was gone. The ordinary world had been pierced, the rhythms of life disrupted, and the stage set for an investigation that would reveal the dark undercurrents hidden behind appearances. What had begun as a simple, routine morning, a walk with a dog, preparations for the holiday, shared domestic life, had transformed into a suspenseful, terrifying uncertainty. The ordinary had been invaded by the extraordinary, leaving a community, a family, and eventually a nation, grappling with questions, fear, and the profound mystery of a life interrupted. The days after Laci Peterson's disappearance unfolded with a slow, creeping dread, like fog rolling over a quiet town, settling into every corner of Modesto. At first, there was hope, fragile and tentative, that she would be found unharmed, that she had simply wandered, been delayed, or encountered some minor mishap. Search teams combed the neighborhoods with methodical precision, moving through streets, parks, and open fields, their voices calling her name into the cold air. Flyers were printed and distributed, their images of Laci smiling, pregnant, glowing with anticipation, pasted on telephone poles, store windows, and car windshields. Every corner of the town seemed to carry her likeness, her face becoming both a beacon of hope and a haunting symbol of loss. Inside the Peterson house, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. The warmth of domesticity that had defined the space was replaced with a tense, hollow quiet. The nursery, once filled with soft blankets and toys, now seemed like a shrine to absence. Each tiny item, a folded Odyssey, a stuffed bear, a carefully stacked pile of diapers, stood as a silent witness, amplifying the sense of unease. The house, meticulously maintained and ordered, now carried an aura of abandonment, of a life paused mid-motion. Friends and family came and went, their faces etched with concern, their voices low, tinged with disbelief, questioning, comforting, all at once. Authorities arrived quickly, their presence both reassuring and unnerving. Officers moved systematically through the home, noting the order and cleanliness, documenting every detail. They examined doors, windows, and locks, seeking any evidence of forced entry. Each room was photographed, every corner scrutinized for signs of struggle, disturbance, or missing objects. The absence of forced entry struck investigators immediately. The locks were intact, windows secured, and the house showed no obvious signs of violence. This absence of conventional evidence was unsettling. It suggested that whatever had occurred did not involve a random intruder, but someone with knowledge, access, and the trust of the person who had vanished. Neighbors were interviewed, some with the casual certainty that only familiarity can bring. They recounted seeing Laci walking the dog that morning, serene, ordinary, unaware of the danger that awaited. Some noticed Scott's composure, noting that he seemed calm, almost unusually so. While some initially interpreted it as a practical steadiness, others found it unsettling, an emotional tone that did not align with the fear and panic expected of a husband discovering his pregnant wife missing. The combination of his composure and the lack of forced entry created a pattern of unease that would later grow into suspicion. As search efforts expanded, volunteers fanned out across fields, the levees, and the waterways near Modesto. The air was crisp and biting, winter winds carrying the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. Every rustle in the grass, every flicker of movement along the canals, became a potential clue. Dogs trained in search and rescue padded through reeds and brush, noses to the ground, pulling handlers toward faint traces of scent, yet each lead seemed to dissolve into disappointment. The search was exhaustive, methodical, but it yielded nothing immediate. With each passing day, the hope that Laci had simply been delayed began to diminish, replaced by a gnawing, indefinable fear that something far darker had occurred. It was in the quiet moments, between the organized chaos of the search, that the first disturbing inconsistencies began to emerge. Scott Peterson's behavior, initially interpreted as calm competence, now began to draw closer scrutiny. He spoke publicly to the media, presenting a composed facade, yet his private communications revealed a dissonance. He was in contact with Amber Fry, the woman with whom he had been secretly involved. His messages were casual, sometimes flirtatious, betraying a normalcy that clashed violently with the public narrative of a grieving husband. Investigators, poring over phone records and testimony, began to note the incongruity, while Lacey remained missing, Scott maintained a life that continued without apparent interruption. This was the first hint that the story of disappearance might intersect with deception. In the days that followed, small, seemingly trivial details accumulated into a growing pattern. Friends recounted remarks Scott had made, his tone at times off, comments that seemed rehearsed or carefully measured. He had mentioned, in passing, the idea of a Christmas without a wife, words that, in retrospect, sounded like premeditation. The sale of Lacey's car, arranged almost immediately, raised eyebrows. Even the calculation of finances and property, mundane acts in normal circumstances, began to appear in a chilling new light, as if they were steps in a plan that only he understood fully. Each small detail, minor in isolation, combined into a tapestry of suspicion, a mosaic that investigators would later assemble to reveal the contours of a hidden reality. Community members, initially unified in concern for Lacey's safety, began to sense the dissonance in Scott's demeanor. Some whispered among themselves, noting the incongruities, the calm that did not feel natural. Others struggled to reconcile the husband they knew with the behaviors that now emerged under scrutiny. The sense of trust, so fundamental in a small town where appearances often guided judgment, began to erode. Lacey's absence, once interpreted as an unfortunate mystery, became a lens through which the contradictions of Scott's character were magnified. Investigators turned their attention to the geographic and physical clues surrounding the disappearance. Lacey had been walking near familiar streets, near paths that she had traversed countless times. There were no eyewitness reports of unusual activity along those routes, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who saw anyone interacting with her in a way that suggested force or coercion. The environment, ordinary and familiar, became a stage for questions rather than answers. Why had she disappeared so completely? What forces had acted invisibly, leaving no trace, no confrontation, no indication? The lack of physical evidence created a tension that would define the investigation, the interplay between absence and implication, between the visible and the hidden. Amid this growing unease, investigators focused increasingly on Scott Peterson himself. The home, the routine, the absence of forced entry, and the subtle behavioral cues coalesced into a central hypothesis. The last person to see Lacey, the person with access, the person she trusted, could not be discounted. Officers and detectives retraced Scott's steps, examining his reported fishing trip, analyzing his communications, and cross-referencing timelines. Each movement, each call, each gesture became data points in an unfolding narrative, evidence not of direct confrontation, but of presence, opportunity, and motive. In parallel, the emotional weight of the case pressed down on the family and community. Lacey's parents, her siblings, and close friends grappled with the ambiguity of her absence, the lack of concrete information, and the growing suspicion that someone they knew, or someone intimately connected, might be responsible. The emotional landscape was turbulent, punctuated by hope, despair, confusion, and fear. Conversations were heavy with speculation, tempered by the pain of uncertainty. Every day without Lacey deepened the psychological strain, creating a collective anxiety that radiated outward, touching neighbors, co-workers, and ultimately, the media, who amplified the story to a national audience. By the end of the first week, the search remained intense, yet inconclusive. Flyers continued to circulate, search parties expanded their range, and media coverage grew relentless. The narrative of a missing pregnant woman, innocent and vulnerable, juxtaposed with the apparent composure of her husband, created a national fascination. Questions multiplied faster than answers, and every new detail about Scott Peterson's behavior, his communications, and his preparations became a focal point for scrutiny. The ordinary rhythms of life in Modesto were fractured, replaced by a tension-filled landscape of investigation, suspicion, and emotional upheaval. The subtle clues, Scott's continued contact with Amber Fry, the calculated decisions regarding property and finances, his words to friends and family, the absence of physical struggle in the home, accumulated like a quiet drumbeat, signaling the possibility of a darker truth. Investigators, parsing through every detail, began to see a pattern that suggested deception, duplicity, and premeditation. The absence of Lacey, so complete and confounding, had forced a confrontation not only with the mystery of her disappearance, but with the uncomfortable recognition that appearances, trust, and domestic normalcy could conceal profound danger. By the time weeks passed, the community's anxiety had transformed into an eerie, palpable tension. Local authorities, now working with state and federal agencies, intensified searches along waterways, levees, and remote areas where Lacey might have been taken. Helicopters swept the skies, boats scoured canals, and dogs searched every inch of terrain. Every movement, every sound, every subtle anomaly became significant, each a potential key to unlocking the mystery. Yet despite exhaustive effort, the physical presence of Lacey remained absent, her story suspended in uncertainty, her life held in the balance between hope and despair. It was within this context, the ordinary world disrupted, the home and town transformed by absence, and the first disturbing signs of deception, that the foundation for the case against Scott Peterson began to solidify. Every small detail, from his public composure to the hidden communications with another woman, from the sale of property to casual remarks about the holiday, would later become critical evidence. The discovery phase, in its subtlety and its horror, revealed not only the immediate mystery of a missing woman, but also the deeper, unsettling reality of betrayal, manipulation, and calculated concealment. The days blurred into nights, the search continued, and the quiet town of Modesto became a crucible of fear and anticipation. Lacey Peterson's absence was more than a disappearance. It was a rupture in the very fabric of the community, a shadow cast over the ordinary rhythms of life. Every street corner, every home, every familiar face became a part of the story, a piece of the puzzle that investigators, friends, family, and eventually a nation, would strain to assemble. And in the center of this unfolding drama stood Scott Peterson, the last person to see Lacey, whose actions, words, and choices would be examined in meticulous detail, each one a potential key to understanding the extraordinary horror that had silently and irrevocably entered a quiet California town. The investigation into Lacey Peterson's disappearance began in earnest, with law enforcement meticulously tracing every possible lead, every conceivable avenue that might explain her sudden absence. The town of Modesto, quiet and unassuming by nature, became an arena of scrutiny, the ordinary streets, homes, and waterways transformed into a web of potential clues. Investigators moved systematically, balancing urgency with precision, knowing that the first days after a disappearance were often the most critical. Volunteers scoured neighborhoods, canvassed local parks, and checked traffic patterns, while detectives interrogated neighbors, friends, and co-workers, piecing together the tapestry of Lacey's last known movements. At first, the investigation considered the possibility of an unknown assailant, someone external, someone who might have taken advantage of the routine and predictability of Lacey's daily life. Officers examined the streets she walked, looking for surveillance cameras, witnesses, and anomalies. They retraced her steps with the same care she might have used herself, noting the time of day, the weather, and the relative isolation of certain areas. Each interview with neighbors yielded fragments, sightings of a woman walking her dog, cars passing, shadows glimpsed in peripheral vision. Nothing concrete emerged, but every detail was logged, catalogued, and re-examined for significance. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded to consider people in Lacey's immediate circle. Family members were questioned in depth, recounting routines, interactions, and any unusual events they might have noticed. Friends offered insights into her habits, her daily rhythms, and the people she trusted most. Each relationship was scrutinized, every detail about personal dynamics examined for the faintest trace of tension or conflict. Investigators sought to construct a psychological map of Lacey's world, hoping to identify anyone whose actions or motives could plausibly intersect with the disappearance. Despite the wide net cast by investigators, initial leads yielded little. The idea of a random abduction grew increasingly implausible in the absence of forced entry, signs of struggle, or witness reports of suspicious behavior. Law enforcement began to focus on people close to Lacey, those who had access to her home, those whose movements could be corroborated or questioned. Within this narrowing scope, Scott Peterson emerged as a figure of central interest, not immediately as a suspect, but as a person whose actions warranted close examination. Scott's initial statements were carefully crafted, outwardly cooperative, and designed to project concern. He participated in search efforts, spoke to the media with composed precision, and answered questions from law enforcement without hesitation. Yet subtle inconsistencies began to surface. Phone records revealed continued contact with Amber Fry, a woman with whom he was involved in a secret relationship. The timing and content of these communications, occurring even as Lacey remained missing, were incongruent with the image of a husband consumed with worry for his pregnant wife. Investigators noted these discrepancies, cataloging each as a potential indicator of motive, opportunity, and duplicity. The initial investigation also explored other potential suspects, examining acquaintances, casual contacts, and local individuals with criminal histories. Each lead was followed with rigor. Investigators interviewed men with past convictions for violent crime, checked local records for restraining orders, and reviewed past disputes in the community. Yet, each avenue ultimately led to dead ends, a frustrating cycle of meticulous work and inconclusive results. The more investigators pursued external possibilities, the more the focus inevitably returned to the home, the routines, and the people Lacey had trusted most. Forensic analysis became a crucial part of the investigation. Officers examined the house for fingerprints, DNA evidence, and traces of disturbance. Every room was photographed in high resolution, every object catalogued, and every surface swabbed for potential evidence. The absence of signs of forced entry or struggle remained deeply troubling. In the absence of physical confrontation, investigators began to consider psychological and circumstantial factors, timelines, behavior patterns, inconsistencies in statements, and patterns of pre-existing relationships. These subtle indicators began to shape a new hypothesis. The disappearance might involve someone familiar, someone with knowledge of Lacey's routines and vulnerabilities. Friends and family also began to notice inconsistencies in Scott's behavior, noting moments of composure that seemed incongruent with the situation. He spoke calmly on camera, maintained a public appearance of order, and participated in the search in a measured, deliberate way. While some interpreted this as resilience, others sensed something off, a lack of the emotional volatility one might expect from a man whose pregnant wife had vanished. These observations, combined with investigators' growing list of questions, created a tension that permeated both the public perception and the internal workings of the case. Amber Fry, initially unknown to law enforcement, became a key figure as investigators began tracking Scott's communications. She revealed that Scott had misrepresented himself, claiming he was divorced, even as Lacey remained pregnant. The revelation that Scott had been leading a double life, maintaining a secret romantic relationship while his wife was missing, added a chilling dimension to the investigation. It suggested a capacity for deception, manipulation, and compartmentalization, psychological traits that aligned disturbingly well with potential premeditation. Each conversation with Amber, every detail she provided, became a critical puzzle piece in understanding not only Scott's behavior, but the broader context of Lacey's disappearance. Detectives then focused on constructing a timeline of Scott's movements. His purported fishing trip was scrutinized with meticulous care, analyzing receipts, eyewitness accounts, and geographical data. Investigators sought to verify his presence at specific locations, attempting to corroborate his story with independent evidence. Minor discrepancies in accounts, small gaps in timing, and inconsistencies between statements became increasingly significant. Each unanswered question added weight to the growing suspicion that the narrative of a husband absent-mindedly fishing might be a carefully constructed facade. As weeks passed, the accumulation of small clues, financial decisions, property arrangements, unusual calm in public appearances, secret communications, began to crystallize into a pattern. While none of these alone constituted proof of wrongdoing, the convergence of circumstantial evidence painted an increasingly troubling portrait. Investigators began to consider motives, psychological profiles, and potential behavioral patterns that could explain both Lacey's disappearance and Scott's conduct. The ordinary appearance of marital stability now appeared fractured, revealing the possibility of a dark, hidden dimension. The investigative team also explored theories involving third parties, analyzing potential threats from acquaintances, transient individuals, and anyone who might have had opportunity. Each line of inquiry was methodically pursued and systematically eliminated, reinforcing the conclusion that external threats were unlikely. The combination of behavioral inconsistencies, access to the home, and the intimate knowledge of Lacey's routines increasingly pointed toward someone within her immediate domestic circle. Family members, initially focused on hope and searching for any plausible external explanation, began to wrestle with the unnerving possibility that the danger came from within. The shift in perception was gradual but profound. The comfortable assumptions about safety, trust, and domestic normalcy began to erode, replaced by a dawning awareness that the ordinary can mask extraordinary risk. For investigators and loved ones alike, the realization was both intellectually compelling and emotionally devastating. Public interest in the case grew alongside these emerging suspicions. Media coverage intensified, capturing the story not only as a local tragedy, but as a national narrative of mystery, fear, and betrayal. Every interview, every public appearance, and every statement by Scott Peterson was analyzed, replayed, and scrutinized for signs of deceit. The combination of an absent wife, a visibly calm husband, and a secret extramarital relationship created a story that resonated with deep cultural fears: the disruption of domestic trust, the betrayal of expectation, and the terrifying possibility that danger often lies closest to home. By the end of the initial investigation phase, law enforcement had narrowed their focus substantially. While other potential suspects had been rigorously considered and eliminated, Scott Peterson remained central, not yet charged, not yet formally accused, but increasingly viewed through a lens of suspicion grounded in circumstantial evidence. Every piece of information, timelines, financial decisions, communications, behavior, was catalogued and analyzed, forming the backbone of a case that would eventually lead to arrest, trial, and national scrutiny. This phase of investigation revealed both the complexity of human behavior and the intricacies of modern detective work. The absence of direct evidence forced law enforcement to rely on subtle indicators, psychological profiling, and painstaking reconstruction of events. Each dead end was as informative as a confirmed lead, narrowing possibilities and clarifying focus. The interplay between observed behavior, corroborated facts, and circumstantial clues created a dense mosaic of inquiry, in which every small detail became a potential turning point in understanding the truth behind Lacey Peterson's disappearance. By the time attention fully centered on Scott Peterson, investigators had amassed a substantial body of evidence: the absence of forced entry, his behavioral inconsistencies, financial and property decisions, communications with Amber Fry, and discrepancies in his timeline. While circumstantial, the weight of these details formed a compelling framework for deeper investigation, one that would ultimately bridge the gap between disappearance and accountability. The case, already emotionally charged for family, friends, and community, had transformed from a local mystery into a psychological puzzle, a study of trust, betrayal, and human behavior under pressure. Every action, every decision, every subtle clue became a lens through which investigators and the public would attempt to understand what had occurred during those early, critical hours when Lacey Peterson vanished from her ordinary, ordered life. April of 2003 arrived like a bitter reminder that time, no matter how long it passes, does not heal uncertainty, it only sharpens it. Nearly 4 months had slipped by since Lacey Peterson vanished into the chill of a Modesto December morning. Days had bled into nights, hopes had flared and dimmed, and the town, once ordinary and secure, had transformed into a tense mosaic of grief, speculation, and suspicion. Families whispered across fences, friends kept vigilant watch over each other, and the media had woven a relentless narrative of disappearance and doubt. The ordinary rhythms of life were fractured, and the persistent shadow of unanswered questions hovered over every street, every home, every conversation. Then, in mid-April, the breakthrough arrived, simultaneously shocking, horrifying, and inevitable. It came in the form of a discovery along the tranquil yet deceptive waters of the San Francisco Bay. The body of a small, yet fully formed, fetus was found tangled in the reeds near the shoreline. It was identifiable as Lacey's unborn son, Connor. Though brief in its physical presence, the sight of that fragile life, abandoned and silent, resonated with devastating clarity. Investigators realized immediately that this was more than a missing person case. It was now a potential homicide investigation, a shift that would transform the very nature of their work. The fetus, entangled in the reeds, was a haunting testament to the life that had been anticipated, planned, and loved, yet violently removed from possibility. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community and across the nation. News outlets, already attuned to the story, amplified every detail. Photographs of the bay, interviews with law enforcement, and witness accounts flooded screens and pages. Each broadcast, each article, carried with it the weight of loss, grief, and disbelief. Families and friends, who had clung to hope during the months of uncertainty, were now confronted with the grim physical confirmation that something profoundly terrible had occurred. The emotional gravity was immense. An unborn child, full of potential and promise, had been taken, and with it, the innocence of a household, the safety of a family, and the trust of a community. Within law enforcement, the discovery of the fetus marked the beginning of a precise and meticulous forensic investigation. Pathologists and medical examiners worked to determine time of death, condition, and possible methods of disposal. Each detail was scrutinized, every piece of evidence catalogued, and every observation weighed against the timeline constructed from previous interviews, statements, and physical records. The location of the body, near the same area where Scott Peterson had claimed to be fishing, immediately raised questions. Was it coincidence, misdirection, or deliberate placement? The forensic team began to consider the intersection of geography, opportunity, and human intent in ways that would prove pivotal in the unfolding case. A few days later, the most devastating and conclusive discovery arrived: the body of Lacey Peterson herself. Her remains were found in the same area along the San Francisco Bay, partially concealed among the reeds and brush. The scene was both ordinary and horrific. The waters lapped gently against the shoreline, the wind rustled dry reeds, and the sun reflected off the bay with serene indifference. Yet within this natural setting lay evidence of human violence, a stark contradiction between the beauty of the environment and the darkness of human action. The juxtaposition was almost cinematic in its horror, a tableau of life interrupted, innocence destroyed, and trust betrayed. For investigators, the location of the bodies provided both confirmation and complication. The area where Lacey and her unborn child were found closely matched Scott Peterson's account of his fishing trip. On the surface, the alignment might have seemed innocuous, a man telling the truth about his whereabouts. But in context, the details began to form a pattern that suggested manipulation, premeditation, and an intent to construct a believable narrative. Every movement, every prior statement, and every prior act of deception now gained weight, and law enforcement began to see not just absence, but a deliberate orchestration designed to mislead and control perception. As forensic analysis deepened, the intricate details emerged: the manner of death, the condition of the remains, and the sequence of disposal. Investigators noted that the fetus's remains had been separated from the mother, suggesting a calculated action intended to obscure identification or evidence. Lacey's body, partially submerged and partially concealed, demonstrated a pattern consistent with deliberate concealment, as if someone had carefully chosen the location to create confusion, delay discovery, and minimize the likelihood of immediate detection. Each forensic detail, from the position of the bodies to the surrounding environment, carried with it a silent testimony of intent, control, and the calculated planning of an individual well aware of the consequences. The discovery prompted immediate action. Law enforcement intensified scrutiny on Scott Peterson, now more than ever focused as the individual with the closest access, the last confirmed presence with Lacey, and the most significant opportunity. Interviews were revisited, timelines reanalyzed, and statements dissected with a forensic precision that left no detail untouched. Every discrepancy, every minor inconsistency, and every unexplained behavior became a potential indicator of culpability. The cumulative weight of circumstantial evidence began to converge, transforming suspicion into actionable focus. Simultaneously, the community's grief and horror intensified. Friends, neighbors, and family members struggled to reconcile the ordinary life they had known with the extraordinary horror revealed by the discovery. Vigils were held, flowers laid along familiar streets, and memorials created for both Lacey and her unborn son. The emotional resonance was profound, amplified by the knowledge that the danger had not come from an unknown stranger, but from someone within the household, someone entrusted with care, someone who had lived alongside the victims. The psychological impact of this revelation was immense, creating ripples of fear, anger, and disbelief that extended far beyond the immediate family. In parallel, investigators focused on the interplay between Scott Peterson's known actions and the new evidence. His communications with Amber Fry, his public composure, and his prior decisions regarding property and financial matters now formed a cohesive pattern of deception. The convergence of forensic evidence and behavioral analysis began to establish a narrative of premeditation and concealment. Each seemingly minor choice, continued secret communications, misrepresentations, and financial maneuvers, acquired new significance, interpreted through the lens of motive, opportunity, and the orchestration of an elaborate facade. Media coverage of the breakthrough was intense and unrelenting. Photographs of the bay, diagrams of the discovery site, and expert commentary filled newspapers, television screens, and online forums. The narrative captivated the nation: a pregnant woman, vanishing without a trace, only to be found months later alongside her unborn child, with the primary suspect being her own husband. The story struck at primal fears: the disruption of domestic trust, the betrayal of intimate bonds, and the horrifying possibility that ordinary people can harbor extraordinary danger. Public fascination intertwined with grief, and the case became a cultural touchstone, a lens through which society examined the darkest corners of human behavior. Investigators, armed with the breakthrough, began to solidify their case. Forensic findings, when combined with Scott Peterson's behavioral inconsistencies, timelines, and secret communications, provided a foundation for legal action. The discovery of the bodies transformed speculation into a prosecutable framework, offering law enforcement the evidence required to move from suspicion to formal investigation of culpability. The meticulous documentation of the crime scene, combined with a careful reconstruction of movements, laid the groundwork for a case that would ultimately become a landmark in both true crime and forensic investigation. For Scott Peterson, the discovery marked a turning point from public suspicion to criminal accountability. His story, once superficially plausible, now required reconciliation with the physical evidence that contradicted it. Investigators began to map every interaction, every phone call, and every action against the newly revealed facts, creating a detailed mosaic of motive, opportunity, and method. Each thread, when woven together, suggested a deliberate orchestration designed to mislead investigators, manipulate public perception, and conceal a horrific act within the ordinary rhythms of family life. The breakthrough also brought a chilling clarity to the psychological dimensions of the case. The premeditation implied by the disposal of Lacey and her unborn child, combined with Scott Peterson's calm public demeanor, pointed toward a calculated, narcissistic approach to human relationships, an ability to compartmentalize, manipulate, and present an ordinary facade while committing an extraordinary crime. This insight, subtle yet profound, would later inform both the prosecution's case and the broader cultural understanding of the events, highlighting the ways in which domestic familiarity can mask unspeakable danger. By the time the discovery was fully documented and analyzed, the trajectory of the case had changed irreversibly. Law enforcement had moved from a search for a missing woman to a methodical investigation into murder. The public narrative shifted accordingly, from speculation and hope to grief, horror, and a growing consensus regarding the culpability of the primary suspect. The ordinary life of a suburban family, once a portrait of stability, had been irrevocably shattered, leaving behind a complex interplay of evidence, emotion, and moral reckoning that would dominate the national consciousness for years to come. The arrest of Scott Peterson was not marked by a dramatic showdown, nor by the shattering crescendo of immediate confession. Instead, it was quiet, almost mundane, yet every detail radiated with tension and inevitability. It occurred as he attempted to escape the consequences of his actions, attempting to evade the scrutiny that had been steadily mounting for months. His hair, dyed blonde, framed a face that had grown taut with worry yet still attempted to project composure. The man who had once walked among friends and neighbors as an ordinary husband, an ordinary worker, and an ordinary presence in Modesto was now revealed as a figure entwined in suspicion and deception. Law enforcement moved swiftly and decisively, apprehending him before any flight could carry him beyond reach. The arrest itself was clinical, professional, executed with precision, yet for the officers present, it was an almost surreal moment, a realization that the person they had observed and interviewed for months was now formally suspected of the gravest crime imaginable. In the days following his arrest, the public's attention intensified exponentially. The media descended upon Modesto like a storm, broadcasting images of Scott Peterson being led into custody, filing past microphones, cameras, and the relentless gaze of a society both fascinated and horrified. News outlets replayed footage of his interviews, juxtaposing his previously calm, even cheerful demeanor with the growing weight of his legal predicament. Every comment, every gesture, and every appearance became a point of analysis, a reflection of character, and, in the court of public opinion, proof of guilt. The dichotomy was striking. The man who had smiled into cameras during the search for his wife now faced the reality of law, and the public's perception of him shifted from curiosity to moral indictment. The trial itself became a spectacle of procedural rigor, emotional intensity, and psychological probing. Courtrooms were crowded, filled with reporters, community members, and observers from across the nation. The prosecution meticulously presented its case, weaving together forensic evidence, behavioral analysis, timelines, and witness testimony to construct a narrative of premeditation and deliberate concealment. They highlighted Scott's extramarital relationship with Amber Fry, demonstrating how deception had been a constant, carefully maintained element of his life even as Lacey Peterson disappeared. His financial actions, calculated property management, and public composure were all presented as part of a broader pattern that suggested motive, opportunity, and intent. Defense attorneys countered with a strategy that emphasized the lack of direct evidence, arguing that the case was built on circumstantial details rather than incontrovertible proof. They portrayed Scott Peterson as a man navigating grief under intense public scrutiny, someone whose actions, while perhaps questionable in timing or perception, did not constitute proof of murder. They highlighted gaps in timelines, uncertainties in witness recollections, and the absence of eyewitness testimony directly linking him to the act of killing. The courtroom became a battleground of interpretation, a theater of psychology, law, and morality where every gesture, word, and expression carried weight. Witnesses were called to testify, some providing critical insight into Scott's behavior, others reflecting on the emotional and social context of the couple's life. Amber Fry's testimony was particularly compelling, revealing not only the extramarital relationship, but also Scott's capacity for compartmentalization, deception, and manipulation. Her detailed account of conversations, meetings, and communications underscored the duality of his life, at once publicly grieving husband and privately clandestine lover. The prosecution used these details to construct a psychological portrait, emphasizing traits consistent with narcissistic personality tendencies, charm, calculated manipulation, and the capacity to prioritize self-interest over moral or ethical constraints. Forensic experts detailed the physical evidence with clinical precision. The placement of Lacey and Connor's bodies, the alignment of Scott's claimed whereabouts with the discovery site, and the absence of forced entry all formed a convergent web that pointed toward his involvement. Each piece of evidence, while perhaps circumstantial alone, became compelling in combination. The prosecution's strategy was to demonstrate that the totality of these elements, when viewed together, was not merely coincidence, but indicative of deliberate action, a meticulously orchestrated crime concealed behind the facade of domestic normalcy. The courtroom itself was suffused with tension. Observers noted the meticulous attention to detail in the presentation of evidence, the careful pacing of witness examinations, and the emotional weight carried by the narrative. Families of the victims, friends, and community members were present, their expressions a mixture of grief, anger, and hope for justice. The trial transcended mere procedural formality, becoming an emotional and psychological odyssey for all involved. Every cross-examination, every objection, and every piece of testimony contributed to the construction of a collective understanding of the events, their implications, and the moral dimensions of accountability. As the trial progressed, the cumulative weight of evidence began to crystallize in the minds of the jury. Patterns of deception, timelines of opportunity, and the meticulous orchestration of behavior provided a coherent narrative that could not be easily dismissed. The absence of direct eyewitness evidence was mitigated by the convergence of multiple forms of circumstantial proof, communications, actions, forensic placement, and behavioral analysis. Each element, while individually modest, collectively formed a compelling story of intent, opportunity, and culpability. Closing arguments were delivered with gravity and precision. The prosecution summarized the evidence in vivid, human terms, emphasizing the betrayal of trust, the calculated nature of deception, and the irrevocable loss of Lacey and Connor. They spoke not merely of facts, but of the emotional and psychological resonance of the crime, painting a picture of ordinary domesticity shattered by extraordinary violence. The defense countered, urging caution, highlighting ambiguities, and emphasizing the necessity of reasonable doubt. The tension in the courtroom reached a palpable crescendo, every person present acutely aware that their judgments, rational and emotional alike, carried profound significance. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Days passed, each moment stretching with the weight of uncertainty, as jurors examined the evidence, debated interpretations, and grappled with the moral and emotional dimensions of the case. The absence of a direct confession made deliberations particularly fraught, yet the consistency and cumulative force of circumstantial evidence began to guide consensus. The jurors weighed the behavioral, forensic, and testimonial elements with painstaking care, aware that the decision would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Ultimately, the verdict was delivered with solemnity and clarity. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for Lacey Peterson and second-degree murder for the unborn child, Connor. The courtroom, which had been tense and charged, erupted in a mixture of subdued relief, emotional release, and moral reckoning. Families and observers experienced a complex spectrum of emotions, grief intertwined with satisfaction, loss tempered by the affirmation of accountability, and the recognition that the ordinary rhythms of life could be irrevocably disrupted by extraordinary betrayal. The sentencing followed, and Scott Peterson was given the death penalty, a reflection not only of the severity of the crime, but also of the profound moral judgment rendered by society through the legal system. The court recognized both the deliberate nature of the act and the breach of trust inherent in the intimate relationship between husband and wife. While appeals and procedural reviews would continue in subsequent years, the initial verdict represented a culmination of months of painstaking investigation, forensic scrutiny, and meticulous courtroom argumentation. The trial also offered broader insights into the interplay between human behavior, criminal psychology, and societal perception. Scott Peterson's capacity for deception, compartmentalization, and manipulation highlighted the challenges of identifying malevolent intent in the context of domestic relationships. The case underscored the critical role of cumulative circumstantial evidence, the importance of behavioral analysis, and the necessity of meticulous investigative work in situations where direct evidence may be absent. It became a touchstone for discussions of domestic homicide, psychological profiling, and the subtle indicators that often precede violent outcomes in intimate relationships. The courtroom confrontation was, in essence, a public unraveling of a life built on appearances. Every detail of Scott Peterson's behavior, from his calm demeanor during the search to his clandestine communications, from financial decisions to calculated misrepresentations, was laid bare, dissected, and interpreted through the lens of accountability. The trial did not merely establish guilt, it illuminated the profound consequences of betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the extraordinary lengths to which human behavior can conceal or reveal moral failure. In the aftermath of the verdict, the Peterson case became emblematic of the darkest intersections of domestic life, deception, and criminality. It was a reminder that horror often resides not in distant, abstract strangers, but in the intimate spaces of familiarity, where trust is assumed and appearances can mask devastating truths. The legal process, with its combination of forensic rigor, psychological insight, and procedural thoroughness, revealed the mechanisms through which society confronts such violations, providing both a measure of justice and a broader understanding of human behavior under extreme circumstances. The verdict against Scott Peterson closed the chapter of a legal battle, but it did not close the chapter of grief, shock, and reflection for the community, the family, and the broader public. Modesto, a town accustomed to quiet streets and ordinary lives, had been irrevocably altered. People walked the same sidewalks, visited the same stores, and looked out from the same windows, but the rhythm of ordinary life now carried the undercurrent of vigilance, awareness, and sorrow. The narrative of trust shattered by betrayal remained a lingering echo, a subtle reminder that darkness could inhabit even the most familiar spaces. For Laci Peterson's family, the aftermath was a complex tapestry of mourning, anger, and attempts at understanding. They were forced to reconcile the image of the daughter, sister, and wife they had known, kind, generous, gentle, with the stark reality of her violent death. Memories of shared laughter, celebrations, and ordinary domestic routines were now reframed in the shadow of tragedy. Every photograph, every personal artifact, every recollection carried the weight of absence, a reminder of what had been lost and could never be reclaimed. The process of mourning was complicated by the intense public attention, with media coverage and societal fascination creating both intrusion and catharsis. Friends and extended family became not only sources of support, but also witnesses to a communal narrative of grief, one in which the personal and the public were inextricably intertwined. Community response reflected a similar complexity. Vigils, memorials, and gatherings were organized, both as expressions of grief and as acts of solidarity. Candles flickered along sidewalks, handwritten notes lined fences, and floral tributes adorned public spaces near where Laci had been last seen. These acts were deeply human, tangible expressions of loss and remembrance, and they transformed ordinary spaces into collective shrines to innocence and love interrupted. Local schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods were touched, with residents confronting questions about trust, safety, and the hidden dimensions of human behavior. The tragedy had revealed an unsettling truth. Horror often arises not from strangers lurking in the dark, but from intimate familiarity, the spaces and relationships we assume to be safe. Psychological analysis of Scott Peterson's behavior became a central focus in both the courtroom and the cultural understanding of the case. Observers noted his extraordinary capacity for compartmentalization, the ability to maintain an appearance of grief while simultaneously managing secret communications, extramarital relationships, and presumably, the orchestration of criminal acts. This duality reflected traits consistent with extreme narcissistic tendencies, charm, calculated manipulation, and emotional detachment. Experts suggested that individuals with these characteristics can navigate complex social environments while committing acts of profound moral violation, exploiting trust and familiarity as tools of concealment. The juxtaposition of ordinary domestic life and extraordinary moral transgression became a focal point for forensic psychology, criminal profiling, and public reflection. The community's collective consciousness was further shaped by the realization that domestic spaces, homes, neighborhoods, family routines, could conceal danger in the most ordinary forms. Laci Peterson had been a woman of trust, visible kindness, and ordinary expectations, yet within her own home, a betrayal had unfolded that culminated in murder. The psychological impact of this revelation resonated far beyond Modesto, sparking national discourse on domestic violence, intimate betrayal, and the subtleties of behavioral warning signs. Discussions emerged not only in legal and psychological forums, but also in everyday conversations among families, neighbors, and friends attempting to make sense of the horror and to protect themselves from similar disruptions in their own lives. Media coverage intensified and transformed into a cultural lens through which the public processed the event. The combination of ordinary suburban life, the expectancy of childbirth, and the betrayal by a trusted spouse created a story that was both terrifying and fascinating. Documentaries, books, and analyses examined every nuance of Scott Peterson's behavior, the meticulous investigations, and the courtroom dynamics. Public fascination was fueled not only by the crime itself, but also by the psychological dimensions, the subtle indicators of manipulation, and the stark contrast between appearance and reality. The case became a template for examining the intersections of domestic trust, human psychology, and moral transgression. Meanwhile, legal and law enforcement professionals reflected on the case as a model for handling complex, circumstantial homicide investigations. The absence of direct eyewitness evidence required a sophisticated combination of forensic science, behavioral analysis, and investigative diligence. The case highlighted the importance of meticulous documentation, careful reconstruction of timelines, and integration of psychological profiling with physical evidence. Lessons learned from the investigation informed protocols for missing persons, domestic homicide cases, and the evaluation of potential suspects, emphasizing the significance of pattern recognition, behavioral cues, and the interpretation of seemingly minor details. For Laci's immediate family, the aftermath involved not only grieving her death, but also navigating the public dimension of loss. Each statement to the press, each interview, and each appearance in memorial or advocacy contexts carried dual significance, a personal expression of grief and a public reinforcement of Laci's memory. The family became inadvertent custodians of narrative, responsible for honoring her life, contextualizing her absence, and confronting both the legal process and societal reflection. These responsibilities, while emotionally taxing, became a form of agency in the face of profound helplessness. By sharing memories, participating in vigils, and speaking to media responsibly, they preserved her presence in the collective consciousness and resisted the reduction of her life to a mere crime story. The cultural reflection extended to considerations of morality, trust, and human relationships. The Peterson case illuminated the profound consequences of betrayal, the fragility of domestic security, and the latent dangers hidden within intimate familiarity. Scholars, journalists, and the public grappled with questions about psychological warning signs, the limits of trust, and the capacity for ordinary individuals to conceal extraordinary moral failings. Discussions about narcissism, manipulation, and compartmentalized behavior were informed by the events, offering both explanatory frameworks and cautionary guidance for interpreting behavior in personal relationships. One of the most haunting aspects of the aftermath was the unresolved nature of certain details. While the conviction established legal accountability, the absence of confession and the inability to fully reconstruct every moment of Lacey's final hours left lingering uncertainty. Questions about motive, emotional state, and the precise chronology of the crime persisted, creating a tension between closure and ambiguity. This tension is often a hallmark of true crime cases. The law can assign responsibility, but human understanding, particularly of psychological and emotional dimensions, may remain incomplete. The void of unanswered questions became, paradoxically, both a source of anguish and a space for reflection, discussion, and education. Society's engagement with the case also reflected broader human concerns, the nature of trust, the vulnerability inherent in intimate relationships, and the ethical imperatives of justice. The Peterson case was discussed in classrooms, in professional training, and in media forums as an example of the intersection between personal behavior, psychological predispositions, and societal consequences. It became not merely a story of crime, but a story of learning, warning, and reflection, highlighting the necessity of vigilance, empathy, and understanding in human interactions. In practical terms, the aftermath prompted increased attention to domestic safety, missing person protocols, and the integration of psychological profiling into routine law enforcement practice. Communities reconsidered assumptions about neighborly familiarity, while families reflected on patterns of behavior that might signal risk. The tragic clarity of Lacey and Connor's deaths reinforced the necessity of early recognition, careful documentation, and prompt action in situations of potential domestic threat. The lessons, both practical and psychological, extended far beyond the immediate tragedy, shaping future approaches to prevention, investigation, and understanding of intimate crimes. Over time, the reflection and mourning of the Peterson case became intertwined with the broader narrative of human vulnerability and resilience. The family's grief, the community's mourning, and the public's fascination converged in a multi-layered response that encompassed emotional, ethical, and intellectual dimensions. The case became a cautionary tale not simply of crime, but of human behavior, illustrating the dissonance that can exist between appearance and reality, between trust and betrayal, and between ordinary life and extraordinary moral violation. Even years after the conviction, the echoes of the case continued to resonate. Lacey Peterson was remembered not only as a victim, but as a symbol of innocence, planning, and domestic expectation brutally interrupted. Connor's brief existence became a poignant emblem of life unfulfilled, a reminder of the consequences of betrayal and the human capacity for both care and cruelty. Scott Peterson remained incarcerated, a focal point for psychological analysis, public scrutiny, and legal discourse, while the broader society grappled with the enduring implications of his actions. Ultimately, the aftermath of the Peterson case underscores the profound interconnections between human psychology, trust, and societal structures. It illustrates how the ordinary can mask extraordinary risk, how meticulous investigation and forensic science can uncover hidden truths, and how communities and families navigate grief, justice, and reflection in the wake of profound loss. The case remains a lasting study in the fragility of domestic trust, the complexities of human behavior, and the enduring pursuit of justice in the face of intimate tragedy. From the very first day of Lacey Peterson's disappearance, the media descended upon Modesto with a relentless intensity that few towns could have anticipated. News crews crowded into driveways, cameras perched on rooftops, microphones thrust into faces flushed with grief and confusion. Every statement, every interview, and every movement of the Peterson family became a potential headline. The disappearance of a young, pregnant woman had all the elements of a story that would grip the nation: innocence, domesticity, suspense, and the unsettling suggestion that evil might reside not in strangers, but in the most familiar of places. Television stations interrupted regular programming to provide live updates. Newspapers ran daily bulletins on the search effort. Talk shows debated theories, experts weighed in on potential motives, and websites chronicled minute-by-minute developments. The media narrative shaped perception, creating a continuous feedback loop, in which public attention amplified the intensity of coverage, and vice versa. Early coverage focused on hope and the search for Laci. Viewers were given an intimate portrait of a woman described by neighbors, friends, and family as gentle, kind, and devoted to her family. Photographs of Laci smiling at the camera, her hand resting on her growing belly, were juxtaposed against images of search teams combing fields, the waters of the San Francisco Bay, and wooded areas near Modesto. There was an almost cinematic tension between innocence and danger, between the ordinary rhythms of suburban life and the lurking possibility of violence. The public followed every update with bated breath, investing emotionally in the narrative and projecting their fears, hopes, and judgments onto the unfolding story. As the investigation progressed and details of Scott Peterson's extramarital affair emerged, the media narrative shifted dramatically. The contrast between Laci's innocence and Scott's deception became central to the story. Every revelation of Scott's communication with Amber Frey, every disclosure of financial maneuvers, and every observed inconsistency in his statements added layers to the public's perception of guilt. Television segments replayed recordings of interviews, dissecting tone, inflection, and body language. Analysts debated whether a husband's calm demeanor in the face of his wife's disappearance was evidence of composure, or a chilling indicator of culpability. The story was no longer just about a missing woman. It had evolved into a psychological drama, a moral puzzle, and a spectacle of human behavior under extreme scrutiny. The nation became captivated by the duality of Scott Peterson's life. To the public, he was at once the grieving husband, appearing in press conferences and interviews, and the secret lover, engaged in clandestine communications that revealed a starkly contrasting reality. The media framed this tension as emblematic of hidden darkness within domesticity, and the narrative captivated millions. National talk shows, magazines, and news networks debated the implications of this duality. How could someone maintain a public facade while concealing private transgressions? What did this reveal about trust, morality, and the potential for deception within intimate relationships? The story invited not only fascination, but also reflection on societal assumptions about family, domesticity, and personal character. When the bodies of Laci and her unborn son Connor were discovered, media coverage escalated into a frenzy of horror and incredulity. Graphic descriptions, aerial shots of the San Francisco Bay, and interviews with investigators and family members dominated broadcasts. Public reactions ranged from shock to anger, from profound grief to a desire for justice. Newspapers carried emotional editorials. News anchors struggled to reconcile the serenity of the Bay with the violence it had concealed, and citizens around the country engaged in conversations about betrayal, morality, and the vulnerability inherent in human relationships. The juxtaposition of ordinary suburban life with extraordinary violence created a narrative that was both horrifying and irresistibly compelling. Public fascination was further amplified by the courtroom proceedings. From opening statements to closing arguments, the trial of Scott Peterson became a national spectacle. Media outlets covered every detail, broadcasting segments on jury selection, expert testimony, forensic analysis, and witness accounts. The presence of Amber Frey in the courtroom, recounting intimate details of her relationship with Scott, captivated audiences. Her testimony, framed against the backdrop of Laci's absence, humanized the betrayal and made the psychological aspects of the case tangible. The public was invited to witness, almost in real time, the unraveling of a facade, the meticulous construction of a narrative of guilt, and the painstaking legal work that sought to transform suspicion into accountability. Television coverage often blurred the line between information and entertainment. Courtroom proceedings, legal commentary, and psychological analysis were packaged for maximum engagement. Experts discussed behavioral indicators, forensic evidence, and the potential motivations of the accused. Panels speculated on guilt, on emotional states, and on the timing of events. Public opinion, shaped by this continuous exposure, began to solidify around the notion of Scott Peterson's culpability, even before the verdict was reached. The coverage was immersive and unrelenting, offering audiences a front-row seat to a drama that combined legal process, psychological insight, and human tragedy. Magazines and print media contributed additional layers of narrative. Long-form articles provided in-depth explorations of Scott's background, his behavior, and the details of Lacey's life. Profiles of the Peterson family painted pictures of a seemingly ordinary household disrupted by extraordinary betrayal. Opinion pieces debated the ethical and moral dimensions of the case, discussing the broader societal implications of domestic homicide, the role of media in shaping perception, and the psychological profiles of individuals capable of such deception. Cultural commentary connected the case to themes of trust, morality, and vulnerability, ensuring that the story remained not just a local tragedy, but a national point of reflection. Social response was equally significant. Community members created tributes, memorials, and online spaces for discussion. Vigils were organized in Modesto, providing an outlet for collective mourning and reflection. Citizens engaged in public discourse, debating the evidence, Scott Peterson's behavior, and the broader implications of the crime. The story became a cultural touchstone, serving as both a cautionary tale and a framework for understanding the complexities of intimate relationships and domestic violence. Public fascination was fueled not only by the crime itself, but by the psychological and moral questions it raised. How could a trusted spouse commit such an act? What warning signs might exist in ordinary life? And how does society reconcile appearances with reality? The case also provoked broader societal conversations. Experts in psychology, law, and criminal justice examined Scott Peterson's behavior, discussing the implications of narcissistic tendencies, deception, and compartmentalization. Media narratives emphasized the human and emotional dimensions of crime, connecting forensic analysis with moral reflection. Schools, professional organizations, and community groups used the case as a teaching tool, exploring the intersections of trust, deception, and accountability. Public discourse extended far beyond Modesto, resonating across the country and influencing perceptions of domestic safety, criminal behavior, and societal vigilance. Ultimately, the media and public reaction transformed the Peterson case into a lens through which broader themes could be explored. The story illuminated the fragility of trust, the hidden dimensions of human behavior, and the moral consequences of deception. It demonstrated the power of narrative in shaping public perception, the influence of psychological insight in interpreting behavior, and the emotional resonance of stories that combine innocence, betrayal, and loss. The case became both a cautionary tale and a study in the intersection of crime, media, and society, a reminder that human behavior, however ordinary it may appear, can conceal extraordinary darkness. Even years later, the Peterson case continues to capture attention. Documentaries, true crime podcasts, and analyses revisit the events, dissecting each decision, each piece of evidence, and each moment of deception. The cultural imprint remains strong. Lacey's life and Connor's brief existence are remembered, Scott Peterson's actions are scrutinized, and the case serves as a reference point for discussions about domestic trust, criminal psychology, and the enduring impact of betrayal. Media and public engagement ensured that the story was not merely a local tragedy, but a national conversation, a reflection on human nature, and an enduring exploration of morality, justice, and emotional resonance.